Coming up next on the AI Policy Podcast, we'll talk about the AI Seoul Summit, U.S. China AI safety talks, and we'll talk about China's Zeus shield. I'm Andrew Schwartz, and I'm here with my colleague Gregory C. Allen.
Great to be here, Andrew.
So, Greg, let's jump right into it. On May 21st, the Republic of Korea and the UK co-hosted the AI Seoul Summit. You recently returned from Korea and had the opportunity to participate. Before we dive into your biggest takeaways from Seoul, can you explain how this event relates to the November 2023 UK AI Safety Summit?
Yep. Almost over jet lag at this point, and it was a great trip. Love to talk about it. So the Seoul AI Summit was originally going to be called the Seoul AI Safety Summit, and that is because it is the direct successor to the UK AI Safety Summit, which was a pretty big conference last November, hosted by British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and attracted a lot of attention from the leading companies and many countries. So at the time that they had that, they said this should not be a one-off. We want to have a continuation of this. And South Korea raised their hand and volunteered to host the second in this series, which just occurred in May 2024. And then the third will be sometime in 2025, organized by France. So there's going to be yet another follow-on.
So tell me about your biggest takeaways from Seoul. What did you see there and what did you experience?
Sure. I think the first thing to say is that there was some reporting in the media, specifically Reuters ran a piece in early April that was saying that the Seoul AI Summit was looking to be a significantly diminished successor and that many companies weren't even planning to attend. And I think that actually was sort of the rumor I was hearing circa early April. But to its credit, the South Korean government and their UK co-hosts, I think, pretty much turned it around. What ended up happening was a genuinely substantive summit with some genuinely substantive commitments from both countries and companies related to AI safety in particular. But notably, South Korea said that while they wanted AI safety to be a critical focus of the summit, they didn't want it to be an exclusive focus of the summit. So they broadened it out to also address topics like inclusivity and innovation, which are important in the South Korean goals for AI policy.
So which countries really participated and really showed up with ideas?
So the UK AI Safety Summit had 28 countries plus the European Union. It includes pretty much all the countries that are heavy hitters in artificial intelligence, notably also including China, not for the leaders summit, but for the ministerial meetings. China was invited to the UK AI Safety Summit, and South Korea just ran that playbook again. So they re-invited everybody who was invited the first time, and in general, folks came back in terms of the meetings. Now, what's worth noting here is that it's pretty easy to come back because the leaders meeting was held virtually. But then the corporate meetings and the ministerial meetings, and then parts of the event that I participated in as a representative of academia and civil society, those were all in person. And it got pretty good turnout. All the major AI companies were there. And of course, South Korea was very excited to highlight the leadership of South Korean firms on both the hardware and software side of AI.
So what do you see as the biggest achievements of the AI Seoul Summit?
Sure. I think the biggest substantive achievement from my perspective is the collaboration agreement around AI safety institutes. So one of the new things that came out of the UK AI Safety Summit was that the United States and the United Kingdom both announced that they're going to launch these things called AI safety institutes. This is a new type of government organization focused on various aspects of AI safety, whether that's promoting research, issuing guidance for how to actually go about things like red teaming your large AI models, and disseminating best practices in this area. So that was what the UK Safety Summit did. It created this new type of institution and said it's appropriate for governments to do that. Well, in the 6 months since the UK summit, multiple governments have announced that they are also going to create these things called AI safety institutes. Japan, for example, did it not long ago, and South Korea at the summit announced that they will also create an AI safety institute. That is one part of the achievement, but I think the more substantive achievement was that they secured a collaboration agreement between the countries that are running this. So whereas the United Kingdom, their achievement is saying that increasing AI safety capacity in the government is something that we need to be focusing on. South Korea's achievement is saying that To the extent that we create all of this capacity, our institutions are going to cooperate. We're going to make this a collaborative endeavor around AI safety. And so the same way that we mastered other topics like automotive safety or airline safety, and those are collaborative endeavors between countries, AI safety is going to fall in that same bucket. And I think that's a meaningful achievement.
So tell me some of the other meaningful outcomes beyond AI safety.
Sure. I think what we were just talking about was AI safety in the government sense and these AI safety institutes, but there was also some important corporate commitments. So in the UK summit, there was a major focus on frontier AI safety. So not just the state of the art in AI today, but what the state of the art might look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Well, during this one, there are now 16 companies who announced that they are going to adhere to these frontier safety commitments. And that includes OpenAI, Microsoft, Meta, G42 of the UAE, and Google and Anthropic. And these companies are committing that when it comes to AI safety at the most advanced level, often defined as, involving more computation than 10 to the 26th flops, that they're going to have specific items around transparency and accountability for these extremely capable systems. And I think that's a noteworthy commitment. Another private sector focused thing was what is called the Seoul AI Business Pledge, which goes a little bit more beyond just safety. And these 16 companies, which partially but not entirely overlap with the 16 companies from the frontier safety commitments, agree to, quote, efforts for responsible AI development, advancement, and benefit sharing. And that included a lot of Korean firms and naturally focused on the goal of inclusivity and thinking about what AI is going to look like in the developing world as well as the developed world.
So given all that, what do you think the next major milestone we can expect to see for multilateral AI safety agreements?
Well, as folks who listen to this podcast know, the AI safety summits are not the only important diplomatic venue for this. There's important stuff going on in the G7, there's important stuff going on in the OECD, et cetera. But officially, the successor conference is going to be in France. And I think one question here is what France wants. They have not yet announced the agenda for this. That's currently unclear. But recently, French President Emmanuel Macron said that France was engaged, quote, in an AI battle across 5 major areas: talent, infrastructure, uses, investment, and governance. And you might notice that safety is not even on that list of Macron's 5 priority topics. And so my sort of question is the French successor going to retain this focus on AI safety, or are they going to fold that into the governance section and then emphasize the areas that Macron's more interested in, which have to do with competitiveness in AI?
All right, let's shift gears a little bit to U.S. China AI safety talks. As we discussed in the last episode, U.S. and Chinese officials recently met in Geneva to discuss AI safety. Since then, details have begun to emerge about how these first-of-the-kind talks went. How'd they go, and what's your overall impression of how productive they actually were?
So this is something that folks in the AI safety community have been emphasizing really for years now. They basically say there are some aspects of AI safety where the United States and its allies might want to view these issues as a source of competitive advantage. If our stuff is more reliable than their stuff, great. Hopefully people will buy more of it and use more of it. But there's other aspects of AI safety that are a little bit more systemic. If Chinese AI helps terrorists somewhere create bioweapons, that could have global implications, not just Chinese implications. And so the point here being that there's some aspects of AI safety where the United States and China actually have aligned interests, and we should be willing to have conversations on those topics. So with that logic, when they met, President Biden and Chairman Xi Jinping agreed to have a dialogue among experts around AI safety between the United States and China, so on a bilateral basis. So that has now finally taken place. It happened on May 14th in Geneva, included a lot of the heavy hitters in United States AI policy on the national security side and on the AI safety side. So Elizabeth Kelly, who is the head of the U.S. AI Safety Institute, she was there. Ben Buchanan, who works at the White House Chief of Staff's office and also the White House National Security Council and is one of the critical critical figures in orchestrating the AI executive order. He was there, as was Seth Center of the State Department and Tarun Chhabra of the NSC. So these are really people who are very influential in AI policy in the United States. They were there. All the relevant interagency, folks who have a stake in AI safety were there. And notably, China brought a lot of folks as well. So the overall Chinese side was led by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, officially co-chaired, but perhaps a little bit more heavily weighted towards Ministry of Foreign Affairs leadership. But the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology was there, the Cyberspace Administration of China, which has an important AI regulatory role, the National Development and Reform Commission, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, and then finally, the Chinese Communist Party Office of Central Foreign Affairs.
So they brought the whole kitchen sink.
They brought the whole kitchen sink. And it's important to remember here that the Chinese government and often has a mirror image in the Chinese Communist Party. So the Communist Party has their own sort of foreign affairs stuff, who every once in a while can outrank the official civilian folks. I will say, from what I've heard, in terms of what happened, the discussion here, I think the Biden administration is pleased just that the conversation even happened.
Sure.
I think expectations were pretty low going in that China was going to engage substantively, but for their part, they just wanted to see, what the Chinese interagency process looked like, who were the various stakeholders. And of course, when you have Xi Jinping saying this meeting will take place, sometimes that can actually have an organizing function on the Chinese side, because their interagency process is not always a well-oiled machine when it comes to issues like this. So suddenly, these folks are getting together and they're having a substantive conversation around AI safety even before they come and meet with the United States. And now, folks in the United States government know who their counterparts are for the sort of critical issues of AI safety. And while I don't think that led to an especially substantive conversation this time around, at least the experience from the Cold War was that there was a lot of useless talks around nuclear safety issues before there were useful ones. And some of the seeds of the useful ones were planted at those seemingly useless ones.
So you mentioned at the outset of this that the U.S. and China are aligned on some of these issues.
Oh, no. Should be aligned. They have aligned interests. Whether or not they have aligned policies is an entirely different question. And I think that is
That's
one
an
of the
important distinction.
Totally. I think that is one of the important takeaways from this conference is, you have this community of track 2 dialogue. So for folks in the audience who don't know, track 2 is when our businesses or civil society talk to their businesses or civil society. Track 1 is formal government to government diplomacy. And I think what's interesting is there have been these track 2 dialogues on AI safety between the United States and China that have been going on, since at least 2018. I was a part of some of these dialogues in 2018 prior to my entering government. And I think what has really emerged that I think is so interesting is there are dozens of organizations in the United States who will say that they are part of track 2 dialogues with Chinese, academics and so on. What's interesting is I talked to somebody who did an inventory of all of these track 2 efforts recently, and they're all talking to the same Chinese institution with the same primary Chinese interlocutor.
So it's 12 different U.S. organizations talking to the same people.
Exactly. Talking to the same people who are claiming to be the independent voices of China, but they're the only independent voices of China who've gotten permission to speak externally. Right. So I think that sort of leads to a little bit of skepticism about what that might actually be looking like on the other side. Nevertheless, in the track 2 dialogues, I think we've heard a lot of interest and enthusiasm about a track 1 AI safety dialogue between the United States and China. That's at least what Chinese academics are saying in this context. But then you actually have the track 1, and what China says is they really see safety primarily in development terms. China is still very much in the same way it does this on climate change, where it basically says, you should go easy on us in climate change agreements because we're a developing country. So even though we're the world's largest producer of CO2, we still have a very low standard of living. And so obviously, the United States, Europe, Japan, et cetera, should have stricter climate change standards than we should have. They're saying the same sort of thing on AI safety, right? That we view risks differently because we are facing the risks of poverty or other kinds of things. And so in general, we think that the standards should be, and obviously these standards have not yet been negotiated or anything like that, but they're just saying in general, what is going to apply to you, we are not necessarily going to be willing to say should apply one-to-one to us.
Yeah, I was going to say, part of the skepticism around this has got to be things like, the U.S. knows that China uses AI to surveil people.
Yeah.
And uses facial recognition with the Uyghurs and things like that. So it's hard in some ways to see any alignment when it comes to this technology. What about that? And what are the prospects for the future? You said that, sometimes it takes useless dialogue to get to useful dialogue. Do you believe that this is going to continue, and under what framework will it continue?
Yes, and I think the United States side made the points around human rights and the way in which AI can be used to violate human rights, and then in fact the ways in which China is using AI to violate human rights. But we make that in a lot of diplomatic fora, and it's kind of like screaming at a stone wall, at least when it comes to China. They usually never acknowledge anything or move an inch on those things, which isn't to say we should stop saying it, but just the point is expectations should be low in terms of what it's actually going to have in terms of an impact on China.
Well, we're also saying cybersecurity, South China Sea, et cetera, et cetera. We're saying a lot, human rights. So we're saying a lot, and now we're trying to find some areas of agreement. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's what's a little bit concerning, right? Is that even the areas where you can at least make the argument why we should have aligned interests, like climate change, like AI safety, even in those areas, the Chinese side is, just reading the same talking points they always read and are viciously critical of the United States, even as the United States is saying, well, let's talk about the parts where we might have shared interests and focus on those types of issues. So it's a tough time for U.S. China diplomacy. If you talk to anybody who has decades of experience, like, for example, a Kurt Campbell, they'll make very clear, how different diplomacy with China has been compared with, 10 years ago.
Sure. Well, continuing with the theme of China and AI, on May 20th, researchers at Berkeley Risk and Security Lab published a paper revealing a data set of Chinese origin named Zeus's Shield, the Chinese colloquial name for the U.S. Aegis combat system. What was in this data set, and why is it so unusual?
Well, first, I should give a shout out to my friend Jack Clark, who's the co-founder of Anthropic and still runs the Import AI newsletter, where he, caught this news, and that's how I came into possession of it. So I think what's really interesting here is Zeus's Shield is, of course, the Chinese colloquial name for the U.S. Aegis combat system. The Aegis combat system is like one of the bedrock components of U.S. naval power. And UC Berkeley researchers, they found what appears to be an accidentally leaked Chinese data set of images of U.S. destroyers and related warships. Now, why would machine learning researchers want a lot of pictures of U.S. warships? It's very obvious. It's to train a computer vision AI system to sort of detect these warships.
What? Yeah.
Exactly. And the belief here is that Shanghai Tech, which is an academic institution in China, university, was involved in this research. So it says a few things. Number one, I think it sort of says, duh. Of course, China is working on this.
Right, not hard to imagine that they are.
I mean, as soon as you see AI systems recognizing cats, which was like the big breakthrough more than 10 years ago, people in militaries around the world are being like, this could recognize warships. That might be useful. It's been my go-to example for a really long time. So it's no surprise at all to find out that China is doing this. What might be a little bit of a surprise, right, is that Chinese university researchers who are involved in this research, which comes back to the issue of Chinese military civil fusion and the fact that the linkages between the Chinese military and other institutions in China, whether businesses or universities, are not always clear. In the United States, obviously universities like MIT bid on government contracts, but that's openly disclosed on government websites. You know exactly what they're doing, exactly why they're doing it. It's very transparent. In China, you oftentimes find out about these linkages because there's some kind of data set leak or something was accidentally released, because there's a much greater focus on making these things hidden because basically the trading relationship between the United States and China. Companies and universities know that they are able to collaborate with Chinese institutions on civilian and commercial activities, but when it's military activities, that is simply not allowed. And so I'm sure now every U.S. university is like asking themselves, do we have anything going on with Shanghai Tech right now? Because it turns out that they're a military contractor, and this is the challenge that we're running into again and again. So it's not that this data set was particularly surprising or explosive, but it's a little bit more about what it signifies is part of the thought process right now in Chinese military AI circles.
So what do we do now that we have that information? How do we adjust our mindset?
Well, I think, on the one hand, it's not especially surprising, as I said.
Yeah.
So maybe there's nothing really to update in that regard, except for the confirmation of the obvious, which folks like me have been talking about for a decade now, that China's AI ecosystem is interested in exploring military applications. And there's classified things to talk about on that score, and it's always helpful when there's unclassified things like this where we can point to. Previously, a lot of the examples about China's national security interest in AI were a little bit more focused on the domestic surveillance side of the equation because there was more stuff in the open about those types of issues. The amount of stuff that's available in the open, unclassified sphere on Chinese military AI is a bit thinner, and that's why stuff like this is a little bit interesting. I also think it's kind of interesting that it happened right around the same time as the AI safety talks, right? So just a little bit of a reminder to everybody that while, there might be the happy-go-lucky story of U.S. China dialogues on AI safety, in the background there, it's always worth remembering that there is this important military competition going on in AI as well.
Absolutely. And we will be talking about that in weeks to come. Greg, thanks for this conversation. Super interesting as always.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the AI Policy Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to visit our website, csis.org, for show notes and our research reports. This podcast was produced by David Lotfi, Isaac Goldston, Isabel Burns, and Sadie McCullough. See you next time.